Hi, everybody. This is Lois Sonstegard, and we are here today with Megan Gilgan, and for having a wonderful podcast. It is going to be so exciting for you because she's a mother, a humanitarian, and a leader in the not-for-profit sector. She is Deputy Director of Public Partnerships for UNICEF. She has an incredibly important role in looking at what is the future for our women and children globally. So I'm excited to have you with us today, Megan. And if you would just say a few words about yourself, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our podcast.
Wonderful, Lois. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for having me. I work for UNICEF, which is the United Nations Children's Fund, and we support women, children, and youth throughout the world to make sure that they have access to all they need, all that you would want for your children, to make sure that they can kind of grow into be the next generation of our world. I am a single mom to two boys who are 8 and 11, so that keeps me on my toes at all times. I'm living in New York City. I've lived in many countries around the world, which has been an amazing experience personally and professionally. And I am originally from Vancouver, Canada.
Megan, one of the things that I just was so amazed at when I first met you, there was a group of people, we were at a Marshall Goldsmith seminar, and you stood up amongst this group of people and you made the comment, this is not a direct quote, it's just what I remember. And you said, I have the privilege of every day waking up and knowing I make a difference in millions of lives around the world. And I thought, wow, that is amazing and powerful.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the mission of UNICEF is an enormously compelling one. And I've been with UNICEF for 13 years, worked in a lot of different capacities. But it really is the focus of what we do in terms of how do we do better, how do we reach more children, how do we make sure that we do that in as cost-effective way as possible. So it's been it's a fascinating journey, and it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to do this with my life.
So Megan, with that huge mission that you have, what are the big challenges that you face at UNICEF working with programs for women and children globally?
Well, I think we've made an enormous amount of progress in terms of child health and nutrition, but there's a lot of unfinished business, and there's a lot of children that are being left behind because they live in countries that are in conflict. They live in countries that are in the midst of social or economic, changes or breakdown, but also that we see globally that inequality is growing. And so as much as economies are growing, sometimes they're not taking their youngest members with them. I think the other thing we're very focused on is young people. And how do we make sure that young people, not only do they have everything that they need to kind of grow and develop, but how do we make sure that they have the right skills so that they can engage in the future economy? And so there's a lot of work we need to do around making sure that education systems and skills training systems are giving them those skills so that they can really contribute to the future of the world, the future of their communities. And that, I think, is something that governments around the world are really focused on, because they want to make sure that they have employed and employable workforces. So it's there's a lot of different challenges, but I think the progress that we have made is really reassuring that we can face the challenges of the future.
It's incredible. One of the things in the process of going about that you have talked about is at UNICEF you've taken on a value-added approach to leadership. What does that mean for you, and how have you gone about that?
Well, UNICEF's a really interesting organization because we have both in 190 countries all around the world, in 7 regional offices and in headquarters, we have these amazing technical experts in all areas of child development. And what they bring to the table is basically world-class expertise to help governments and communities make sure that we're bringing the latest and the best approaches to how to reach children and how to improve their lives. We need to make sure that we then manage that extraordinary resource, human resource that we have in the best way. And I think one of the things that we are more focused on is how do we attract the right talent? How do we retain and grow the right talent? And so that's really shifted, I think, a focus to make sure that we are getting the most out of the people that we have and really managing our teams and managing our people in the best way.
So, Megan, right now, that's probably one of the biggest issues all organizations are facing is how do you get the best out of people? And so we have lots of different programs that people, organizations have put in place. Marshall Goldsmith's coaching system is one of them. It's something that you and I are both a part of. You have training in terms of team development, culture and diversity, and the list goes on and on. So as you've approached that, what are some of the things that you've done to really address those issues? Because this is important to all organizations, not just what you're dealing with.
Indeed. I think one of the, we have, I think in UNICEF as other organizations, all of those approaches that you're talking about. I think we've made much greater use of coaching and really tried to encourage a culture of feedback, which is, I think, sometimes hard for very driven people to hear. I think the real challenge in all of these things is how do you change or how do you translate what people learn from all of these different development into changing of behavior? And I think what we've really focused on, at least in the division and the teams that I work with, is how do you focus, model behavior, and really try to incentivize and reward when you see people that are taking on the good practices that they've learned about how to manage high-performing teams. How do we make sure every day that we're recognizing and rewarding that so that it becomes a change in behavior and that we're reinforcing the learning that people get from all of these courses or initiatives, and that it really just becomes a second nature. And I think that's daily work and something that really requires all members of the team to be very aware of how we show up, how we interact. And in a very mission-driven organization like UNICEF, we sometimes focus too much on the what we want to do, and we don't place enough focus on how we're going about it, and is there a better way to get the most out of our people? And I think that's a challenge that many organizations face.
So what are some of the things that you've done to address that? I think it's amazing because it's a huge organization. You also work cross-culturally, across languages. So how have you done it?
Well, I think it's still a work in progress. I think it's also what we've done in the teams that I work with is really try to acknowledge and recognize and look for where we see team leaders that are really empowering their teams. And in some ways that's required a bit of a shift in our thinking, because maybe it's just one of my biases, or we all do. You really respect and you hear from the people that speak up. And so if someone comes to a meeting or makes a presentation and you're compelled by what they're saying, you really recognize that person. And so sometimes we give a lot of time and airspace to those people that are really forceful. What I found is actually, how do we look for how team leaders are empowering the rest of their teams? And so really tried to look at what people are doing. And what I found in my teams is that we sometimes have people quietly going about it, making sure that the teams know what the focus is, trying new ideas, but really letting the team rise. And that means maybe they're not the ones that are so much grabbing the attention. So we need to kind of redirect and really recognize what they're doing to cultivate others and to really move the agenda, even if they're not really at the forefront. And for me, that's required a shift in focus in terms of how I look at my teams.
That's huge, because that's another layer of work for you as the leader, right? Because the squeaky wheel is easy to notice. The people who are doing incredible work every single day and go about doing it with their teams aren't always noticed. So as a leader, how do you do that? How do you organize yourself to really see what is often not seen?
Yeah. I think, the first thing is that you have to look for it, and that's required me to be much more conscious of what's going on, not just what's being delivered, but how it's being delivered. And to really, to look at those, the kind of behind the scenes pieces. How are these people selecting people for their team? How are they setting their team up to succeed? And then to really be recognizing that, both in terms of my interaction with them, but also in terms of the interaction within our division and within our organization, to say, this person has found extraordinary talent, onboarded them, set them up to succeed, and that is success. And so I think as we really start to recognize, both bilaterally and personally, to say, I see what you're doing, and I know how much work that is, and I see the results that it is producing. Please keep doing that. And then in the broader teams, to say, a great piece of work has happened over here with how this team has really flourished, and I want to recognize the team, but also the team lead in terms of making that happen. And I think that starts to shift people's mindset, that it's not just about you as an individual and what fantastic skills you personally may bring to the table, but how you make sure that others are bringing their best selves to the work every day.
There's a attention to follow-up that requires, Megan. And so is there a process of follow-up that you put yourself through as a leader so you really capture that? And the reason I'm asking that is, as I have led groups, I'll go through maybe a month and I'll go, oh my goodness, I didn't pause to take a look at XYZ. I wonder what's really happening there, right? And part of the reason why that happens is because I didn't systematize my follow-up. So how have you gone about doing that? Because I am just amazed that you're seeing these subtle things.
Well, I think, Lois, probably I'm not as systematic as I should be, and so I would take advice from people like you. I think it is. I think we've put it forward as something that is a value of our division. We make sure that as we have management meetings, every 4 or 5 weeks with our team leads, that the subject is not necessarily the what we deliver, but the how, so that we're trying to have that conversation. And then when I'm having my kind of weekly catch-ups with each of my team leads and their broader teams, to make sure that part of that agenda is, how are the things that are, what's going on in the team? Are there areas where you need support in terms of how we bring that on? So I think it's just, how do you make it a part of all of your management systems? to make sure that that's as much as a part of the conversation as sometimes the content that drives us every day.
Mhm. You know, one of the things that you have talked about is an emphasis on looking at the whole person in the organization, and that's a real priority for you. And
Mm.
how do you do that? How do you go about looking at the whole person?
It's interesting. I mean, I think I remember early in my career, I worked in the humanitarian sector. So I worked in Kosovo after the conflict there, in Afghanistan. And the humanitarian sector can be a very male sector. And so I very much felt like I had to leave my personal life at the door and be this professional. And I think as I got older, became a parent, I just realized that number one, that wasn't true. I was a professional while I was a wife, while I was a mother, and that all of that is what I actually brought to the table in terms of how I showed up and how I was valuable to the organization. And then I think as you look at the different transitions in life, a person's performance is highly caught up in what's happening in the rest of their life. Do you have young children and you're slightly struggling in terms of balancing all of that? As we move into middle age, do you have older parents that you're starting to take a care burden on? Do you have teenagers that are struggling through their exams and applying to college? Or are you a single person who is either really positively engaged or maybe struggling a little bit? All of that, I think, really affects how we show up and how we perform. And I think you just have to, as a team leader, you have to know who your people are. And we don't show up to this as kind of disembodied conceptual brains. We show up as our whole selves. And I think we don't pay enough attention to that. I think we don't invest enough in having people understand or be conscious of where they're coming from. And so that affects, how you interact with others. It affects how you manage stress. It affects what you need in terms of support. And so I've shifted my thinking to when I see something that is poor performance, or if someone's not quite, on their game, to really try to invite them to say, what's going on and how can I help? And some of those things are, fully beyond your control in the professional environment, but people really appreciate that you ask the question. And sometimes just that dialogue and understanding, helps people kind of see a way through. And sometimes we can make arrangements that just help them take care of all of the part of their lives, whether it's working remotely or working on a flexible schedule. And I think when you provide that trust and when you provide that flexibility, people really rise and people really lean in and perform and acknowledge that you've seen all of them.
Well, right now, diversity and inclusion is such a hot topic. Organizations are creating programs to address that issue. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about that and thinking about how, if you really look at the whole person, you do have inclusion, don't you?
Indeed.
You really deal with those diversity issues. And if anybody deals with diversity, you do in your organization. And so realistically, the whole person, is that part of how you have dealt with diversity and inclusion? And are there cultures that are threatened by that perspective?
I think one of the things I love about the work that I do in terms of working for the United Nations is that diversity is part of the air that you breathe. We want to look like the world that we serve. And so I work with people from all sorts of different countries, all sorts of different backgrounds, different languages. And that to me is just, one of the things that I continue to be impressed with every day. We do, though, still have kind of microcultures within our organization, offices that become a little bit more dominated by one culture, one people from a certain background, a certain geographic area. So I think looking at the whole person helps us with that, because you also find enormous diversity within people that you didn't realize. My executive assistant is amazing, from Uzbekistan, and I knew that she spoke 5 languages. And as I was coming into the office one day, I heard her speaking in Russian to my HR manager, who's from Cameroon. And I said, "What? How do you speak Russian? What's going on here?" And he says, "Oh, you know, I did my studies in Moscow." And so you realize that even if I look at him on the surface, he's a fantastic professional that's come from Cameroon, but he then also has this intercultural experience in terms of having done his studies abroad. And that, to me, just his perspectives, the knowledge that he brings, but also the perspectives of how people think about things, that's part of the richness. But we have to, in the work that I do and in the division that I lead, we realize that we've become a little bit too skewed in terms of a certain people from a certain part of the world. And so with every hire and every recruitment, we're looking at how do we bring a different perspective so we have more geographic balance, but also how do we bring people with slightly different backgrounds so that we have a balance in terms of different thought processes, different areas of technical expertise. And it's amazing to me how quickly that is seen and ignites, and you can really see the value add that those people bring. And I think that actually then creates this move towards greater diversity. Because if diversity is something that you're doing because it's a requirement or you're trying to hit a certain quota, that doesn't make people want to do it. That makes people feel they have to do it. But I think when you start bringing in and demonstrating how different ways of thinking, different cultural backgrounds, different language abilities, different management styles, that when people see how that really catalyzes and brings more to the team, then they want to do it and they want to embrace it.
You know, what's interesting about that is you look for what it is, the need that the person is going to fill, right? And it's an important piece that you need, they become included all right away. It's because I think the whole concept of inclusion has become very difficult. We work at it, but it's kind of a Band-Aid approach often that we use. But because you're approaching it from filling a need and using diversity to really meet that need, round you out, they're important because you can't function without that.
Right. No, absolutely. And then it becomes part of your daily work. Yes. And then I think once you recognize it, you look for it more, and people then look for those different perspectives. It gets us a little bit around the groupthink tendency, and people then start to reach out and say, well, how would we look at this differently? And I think that's where creativity and innovation really thrive. So, yeah.
It's wonderful to hear. Megan, with all of the experiences that you've had and the richness of your various cultural perspectives, the different groups of people you've worked with, what suggestions do you have for leaders that are really wanting to embrace a larger group of people, get them really involved, increase engagement, look at that whole person element? What are some suggestions that you have, or things that you would like to share that you have learned that are really important?
I think, the main one would be don't take the mission and the values for granted. We need to just constantly restate that and make sure that that is part of our work. And I think an important addition to that is that one of those values is how we take care of each other. And I think in mission-driven organizations, that sometimes gets lost. So to make sure that that awareness of ourselves and our responsibility to foster, engage, and build ourselves and build our teams, that we just need to make sure is constantly in the forefront, that we speak about it, that we reflect on it, and that it is very much a formal part of how we interact. And I just think to be a champion of those, and then to basically, how do we make the systems work such that we are not working against the systems, but the systems are facilitating our work that way. And I think in large organizations and bureaucracies, that can be really tough. And I think we're still in a process of how do we make sure that our systems are really delivering on diversity, on care, and on really valuing the soft skills of management in terms of building these teams that can really excel and deliver.
As you think about that, Megan, what kind of legacy do you think you can leave with that perspective? It's a powerful perspective. Where would you like it to go and challenge, I guess, future?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think particularly in the last couple of years, I think my thinking in terms of my legacy and what I want to prioritize has really shifted. And it used to be very much about an initiative or a strategy that I could deliver, or some of these the very outward facing pieces. And I'm driven by those, and I still really enjoy the challenge of that. But I think I have shifted my thinking, and when I look at what my legacy will be in UNICEF, or what part of that legacy already is, it's the people that I've brought into the organization and helped them navigate their careers through that. And so as I move forward, I think that's really where I want to put my focus, is how do we make sure that we're attracting the world's best people to work for the world's children? How do we retain them? How do we make sure that they find a career path where their contribution is maximized? And so that's been a real shift in kind of what I feel is important. And I think as we go forward, that I think I'd like to have that be my legacy. And more particularly, Lois, that I spent 8 years living and working in Kenya and working in Eastern and Southern Africa. And the women that I met there are some of the most vibrant, strongest, smartest women that I've met. And I think what I really want to do is make sure that as UNICEF moves forward, that we are making sure that we're finding those women, particularly from Africa, and that we're finding a way to bring them to the top of the organization, so that they can really bring that perspective and that drive. So I've got a group of colleagues that I'm working with, and really want to see them, move into the senior levels to really drive the organization forward.
Megan, you are absolutely amazing, and our time has just flown. And there's something else that I want to share with the audience, because it is something that I get questions about a lot, and women share with me their concern about how do we be professional women and also mothers, right? And you and I also share an experience where we have a child that we've nurtured through difficulties that they have had, particularly in learning. Yeah. And so I want to just let people know about that. And if you're willing, at some point in the future, I'd like to come back and just have a discussion about how do we navigate this as professional women and deal with children with special needs and meet those needs in a meaningful way. because I think we need to start having more discussion about that. There's more of us in the professional world that have had this experience than we think often. And many say, what do you do? How did you do it? We're hungry for that. And it's not that any one experience is the answer, but it does open our minds to what we can do.
Indeed.
I'd like to come back to that sometime if you're open.
Absolutely. I would love that. And I mean, you know, I think we've also talked about this. I think that experience of finding a path for your child and making sure that they have the support that they need, I think it does really change your perspective and how you look at the world. And I think that's an enormously valuable perspective that we can't lose. And particularly when we look at people with a wide range of abilities and some things that may be perceived as disabilities. One of the things that we're really struggling with in the developing world is how do we make sure that we're bringing everyone along? And sometimes it's those children with disabilities that do get left behind. So your personal experience impacts on your professional experience in terms of really having an understanding of how challenging it is to try to find the right path for your child.
Right. Megan, thank you so much. And for the audience's benefit, if you have questions or things that you would like to have addressed by Megan, just send us an email. We'll make sure that somehow that information gets to Megan and we can respond to you. So there's a link that will be a part of this podcast. Just let us know what your questions are. Megan, thank you very, very much. You are just such an amazing person and an amazing leader. And actually that little vignette of yours of I wake up every day and make a difference in women's and children's lives around the world. I'll never forget that introduction. So thank you so much for that.
And thank you, Lois, for the conversation. I think every time we have this conversation, it makes you reflect more, it makes you think more. And so this has been a great learning experience for me. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.